Okay, so just checked out the newest WHO report, and we'll get into that in a second. But things aren't looking any better. The most certainly not looking to be improving. So it's not really looking good. But really quick, I just wanted to touch on a comment somebody left on the last video I made, talking about uh, how the coronavirus is the same as SARS because it mutated from SARS. And I mean, technically, they're the same type of virus. And what this picture here shows is a coronavirus cell, right? And it's a virus cell with these little spikes that stick out, right? And that they call that a crown. All these little spikes that come out of the virus cell, they call that a crown, and I believe they're protein spikes, and that's where they get the word corona from. So they call it coronavirus. And yes, SARS is a type of coronavirus, but again, SARS is very different from the current coronavirus that we're seeing right now, the one that they've designated COVID-19, right? Technically, they're both a type of coronavirus, but they're still not necessarily the same thing. It is a mutation, and this is much worse than SARS. Its infection rate is much higher. It's much harder to contain and control than SARS, and you can't compare it to SARS. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick. This again, yeah, technically they're both coronavirus, but SARS was never known as coronavirus. The one that's breaking out right now, it was first reported as coronavirus, so now everybody's calling it coronavirus. So when I say coronavirus, most people understand I'm referring to the current outbreak of coronavirus, the current mutation of it, which again, you can't compare to SARS. It is so different than SARS in so many ways, and it's much worse. So let's get to the WHO report. And again, I've been keeping my eye on Singapore, and as I said, things are not looking good. Singapore had 8 new cases. We have 4 new cases in Japan and 1 new case in Malaysia. So, again, if anybody's out there saying this thing is contained, they can't be honest about that, right? I mean, China kept saying it was contained for weeks. They said, "Oh yeah, we got it contained, we got it under control." And I was just reading an article where tweets from the Chinese government kept coming out saying, "Oh, there's no confirmed possibility of human-to-human transmission. It's being contained. We haven't seen new cases in a while. We got it under control. We're all good." And then all of a sudden, we're at 63,000 new cases in China. 63,000 confirmed cases in China. And again, I wouldn't put too much stock in these numbers. I mean, they can't keep up. It's spreading faster than they can confirm cases in China at this point. So this 63,000 confirmed cases, that's just what they know about. There are tons of people out there who have coronavirus who can't get checked because there just aren't enough doctors to check them, right? It's much higher than 63,000. So just keep that in mind. It is out of control in China. It is completely broken out in China. And what are they going to do? I mean, either they're going to contain it, or just about the entire country is going to get infected. And then what happens? I don't know. But we need to quarantine China, which is what they're doing. But I think we need to start looking at Singapore. Again, we had 8 new cases in Singapore. And if you ask me, we should start banning travel from Singapore. This thing can already be broken out in Singapore, and we wouldn't even know it, right? Because again, our information is 2 weeks behind. When we get confirmation of a new case of coronavirus, that person likely has had it for 2 weeks already. So what I expect will happen in Singapore, sometime in the next 2 weeks, probably we're going to see a huge spike in confirmed coronavirus cases. Sometime within the next 2 weeks. And that's when alarm bells are going to finally go off. And that's when people are going to start banning travel from Singapore. And, start, saying don't travel to Singapore and don't come from Singapore. And if you come from Singapore, you're being put in quarantine, so on and so forth. That's when they're going to finally start to take proper measures to contain it in Singapore. But, again, I think we're a little bit behind, right? It could already be broken out in Singapore. We just don't know it. 8 new cases. And again, I don't know the story behind these cases because I haven't seen any news reports on it. I have to rely on news reports to understand, because this WHO report doesn't really give you a lot of specifics. Sometimes they have little markers here to indicate, the circumstances behind the transmission, and that's important, right? But there's no indicators, there's no markers here, there's no extra information behind these cases in Singapore, and I haven't seen any news reports on it. So I can only assume that they're just normal person-to-person transmission, just people who didn't know they have it transmitting it to other people who don't know they're getting it. And that's currently happening in Singapore right now, and everybody's completely oblivious to it. So the problem is if there is an outbreak in Singapore and we don't know it, and people start traveling from Singapore to other countries, they can start infecting the other countries, and those other countries won't know they're infected. So we got to be careful about Singapore. If you ask me, don't go to Singapore anytime. If you have plans to Singapore, maybe double think them. If you have plans for traveling to Singapore, just double think it. That would be my advice. And again, I could be wrong. Maybe these numbers will drop and we'll see this go back. Again, what we want this number to be at 0. New cases, 0, right? So there's 36 total cases of transmission, person-to-person transmission in Singapore, right? We've had 8 new cases in the last 24 hours since the last WHO report. And again, we need that number to be at 0, and we need it to stay at 0 for like 2 or 3 weeks before we can actually feel confident about it being contained. And we're still having sporadic cases. Japan, we had 4. That's not good. Malaysia, 1. And again, we don't want Vietnam, Malaysia, we don't want to see cases pop up in those countries. And they're really looking at North Korea too. They're worried about North Korea because North Korea is connected to China. And if it gets into North Korea, it could be terrible for North Korea. But for the international community, it won't be as bad because North Korea is already a quarantined nation as it is. People don't travel to North Korea, and people don't travel from North Korea. So that's working in our favor in that regard. North Korea has basically already quarantined themselves. They've quarantined themselves since the Korean War. There's been limited travel between North Korea and the international community. But I mean, if coronavirus breaks out of North Korea, I guarantee you nobody's going to go there. And North Korea already doesn't let people leave, so they're not going to let anyone leave. So as far as the international community is concerned, I wouldn't worry so much about North Korea. If you're concerned about the welfare of the people in North Korea, then yes, you should be very worried about North Korea. Because a country like North Korea, if it starts to break out, the government response is going to be similar to China, where they kind of try and cover it up. And the World Health Organization might not find out about an outbreak in North Korea until it's far too late. Just because of the nature of their government and their tendency to cover things up. And that's part of the problem with China. Is China wasn't very transparent about this in the very beginning, right? They wanted to control the narrative, but in their efforts to control the narrative, they failed to control the outbreak, and that was the worst situation. And then it just made it worse for them. If they'd been more transparent from the onset, it would have been better off for everyone. But that's where we are right now. And again, these numbers in China are not looking too pretty, but I wouldn't put too much stock in them. I guarantee you the real numbers are much higher than what is being reported because they just can't keep up. So, again, not looking too good. Singapore, 8 new cases, not great. That again, is something we need to be keeping our eye on. And as I said, I expect sometime within the next 2 weeks, there'll be a huge spike in cases in Singapore. And that's when alarm bells are going off. Alarm bells should be going off already. We should be taking considerations about travel restrictions to and from Singapore. We should already be considering those. And we should already be considering at least checking people who come in from Singapore. At a very least, checking them for coronavirus when they come in. So that's my take on it. It doesn't look like it's being contained. Do I hope it will be contained? Yes. Does it look like that's happening? No. This is highly contagious, and I feel like the WHO is underestimating. I feel like all the disease control organizations we have underestimated this virus, right? They compare it to SARS. They look at SARS and they look at how we were able to contain SARS, and they expect kind of the same thing to happen here, but that's not happening. You know, don't look at it. You know, this is a completely, I mean, it's completely different in the way it spreads and the way it behaves. Again, they're both coronavirus, but their behavior is different and their capabilities are different. So you can't compare it to coronavirus, right? It's not the same thing. So just a quick video, really quick. Again, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Even if there are no coronavirus cases in your country, just be prepared. Just have a couple of weeks of food supply on hand. So if your city gets quarantined, you have food in your house. You know you can at least hold out for a couple of weeks and hope things pass. Because once your city is quarantined, if your city gets quarantined, the moment it's quarantined, the supermarkets are going to be rushed. People are going to be buying up all the food, all the survival supplies and everything. And you're going to have to fight them for those supplies. If you preempt that, if you're ahead of them and you stock up with supplies beforehand, while they're all battling each other for their supplies, you're good and you're at home. You got your supplies, you're set. So again, and then if your city doesn't get quarantined, okay, you got 2 weeks of food. Eat it, right? If things get contained and the coronavirus is no longer a threat, eat your food and you're good. So that's my little bit on that. Just be aware, keep your head up, be alert of what's going on, and I'm going to continue to do these reports on the coronavirus and just keep an eye on Singapore. If this thing breaks out, we're going to start seeing news reports in the next week or two about, oh, Singapore. Yeah. Anyways, all right. Thanks for watching.